Welcome, everyone, to another episode of The Scuttlebutt. I'm your host, Sean Hall, Director of Programming with the Veterans Breakfast Club. We're a nonprofit in Western PA whose mission is to create communities of listening around veterans and their stories to connect, educate, heal, and inspire. You can find out everything there is to know about the VBC on our website, www.veteransbreakfastclub.org, including all of our in-person and online events. Sign up to become a member, donate to our mission, as well as sign up for our free quarterly magazine. As for today's episode of The Scuttlebutt, I will have on Victoria Kelly. She is the author of the book Homefront, which was recently released. She is also the author of a fiction book, Mrs. Houdini, and a collection of poetry, When the Men Go Off to War. Victoria graduated from Harvard University. She received her M.F.A. in creative writing from the Iowa Writers Workshop and her Master's of Philosophy in creative writing from Trinity College Dublin, where she is a U.S. Mitchell Scholar. Her fiction and poetry have appeared in Best American Poetry, the Autumn House Anthology of Contemporary American Poetry, Prairie Schooner, Southwest Review, and dozens of other journals and anthologies. Her novel, Mrs. Houdini, was a People's Magazine Best New Book, a USA Today New and Noteworthy Book, a Jeopardy Pick, and a Publisher's Weekly Star debut. I had a great conversation with Victoria. I've loved having her on the program. Please check out her book, Homefront, right down here in the description. Also, When the Men Go Off to War. You can check out Mrs. Houdini if you're into fiction as well. But hope you enjoy this conversation above all. I know I did. So thank you so much for supporting the podcast and enjoy the show. Joining me now is Victoria Kelly. You are the author of 3 books, and I'm really excited to dive into the stories of each of these books, especially your upcoming book, Homefront. But love for you to introduce yourself. Welcome to the Scuttlebutt.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm really excited to be on here. I love what you guys do, and yeah, I'm just happy to talk about my stuff, military stuff, all that, all the stuff. So, yeah, so I am a writer. I have written 3 books, all different genres. So
Mhm.
poetry, fiction, and then a short story collection. So fiction, fictional short stories. And I've been, yeah, writing for 20 years, and I was a active duty spouse of a Navy fighter pilot for about 10 years. Today I'm a veteran spouse, and just it really impacts the stuff that I write, all those experiences that I had, and
Mhm.
just pretty, like I love being active in the military community and supporting spouses and families and all of that stuff.
I've had
So, and I'm
on,
a a mom of 5. So,
don't forget that. That is
yes,
important.
that is a big part of my life. So, yeah.
And I've had on Blue Star Wives throughout the course of the Scuttlebutt's history. So it was interesting the first time I had a Blue Star wife on because you gotta dive into that world a little bit, and it's not a world that we get to hear about all that often. Especially whenever a lot of the talk is usually with just the veterans of Vietnam or World War II. But did you come from a military family? Were you exposed to that world early on, or was it something that was brand new, fresh to you whenever you got married?
No, like I knew nothing. So, I mean, the closest military connection I had was my sister found out we were related to the revolution. We could trace our family to the Revolutionary War, so at least part of it. So that was really it. My grandfather was in World War II, like most people of that generation. He was a medic in Nagasaki after he went into Nagasaki after the bomb was dropped.
Wow.
That had a huge impact on my family, because he had severe PTSD and that drank, and he actually died when my mom was only 13. So I never met him, but
Mm.
that definitely had I think kind of a ripple effect through, the family, that, he had that experience. So yeah, I mean, that was my closest relative who served. So
So how much of a culture shock was it then whenever you were brought into the military fold?
I was young. I was a sophomore in college,
Mhm.
and I went to the Naval Academy, I for a conference, and I at the time thought I wanted to do international law, and there was this international foreign affairs conference. So there was a student from, they do it every year, a student from pretty much every college or most colleges around the country, and they come together. That was where I met my man who then became my husband, he was a student at the Naval Academy. So I got in like really early. So like academy life, and then we kind of went our separate ways to do graduate school. We were doing graduate school at different places, and then eventually got married, and then kind of entered that like whole active duty life after that.
What
So
were your expectations of it, and how did the real thing differ from that?
I I always loved it. Like I love the community. I came before we got married, I did 3 years of graduate school in creative writing programs. So it was like with a very like intellectual group, and everything was like serious and revolved around, writing and publishing and all that. And then you go from that to like the military life, and it's just completely different. And like no one cares like where you went to school or like what your degrees are or like any of that stuff. I loved how it was just like real people, like, and everyone was on the same playing field. Like
Mhm.
people's ranks, but everyone knows what everyone makes. Like there's no like like the salaries are public. Like
Right.
there's no like I felt like there wasn't really like that weird like competition that you sometimes get like in the academic world. So I
Right.
liked that. That was nice.
Did that shift your career, as sort of your husband's career, and then you getting involved in this? Did that shift what you said you wanted to do international law, so did you go a
Yeah, no,
separate route
I
then?
gave that up in college because I took the LSATs and hated it. And and so I gave that up. And then I decided to apply for some international scholarships for writing because I was also really interested in that. That was my major actually, was English. So I was fortunate. I got a full year scholarship to Ireland to do a writing
Oh.
program with the Mitchell Scholars. Who are part of the US Ireland Alliance. They're like such a wonderful organization. So I did that for a year and then went to the Iowa Writers Workshop for 2 years and did another graduate program. So I was like fully in the writing world. So actually it worked out great because I was able to write like, we had all this security, being in the military. I ended up teaching at Old Dominion University when we moved to Virginia Beach. So I taught creative writing there. So I was able to like balance things really well. And I thought that worked out really nicely with the idea of being a writer. It was good.
I give a shout out to Virginia Beach. I spent some time there myself, not as a military brat, but I lived there for a little time and loved the
Oh,
jet
okay.
noises and Oceana. And that's when you said Old Dominion. I'm like, I know that area.
Oh, I love Virginia Beach was the best. We lived a block from the ocean. I mean, like you don't realize it when you're there how great it is, and then you
Yeah.
leave and you're like, "Oh, that was actually really amazing. Like I could walk to the beach every day, and
Yeah.
that was amazing." So, yeah, best place to
A
live.
little different than Ireland. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that, maybe our listeners as well. Just like that sounds like a really incredible opportunity and living in Ireland for a year. And what was it like? What did you learn?
Yeah, it was, and again, like I was 22 when I went over, and like you don't realize how lucky you are like to have we had the scholarship program was amazing. Like we had a stipend, room and board, we had a stipend, we had did trips like all over the country, and then I would travel around Europe at the time. And Ireland is really interesting because it's so small. And especially like it's got a really rich writing background. So the
Hmm.
writing community is really small. So I was in Dublin and I would go to these events and there'd be like the most famous Irish writers there. Like, but like, yeah, so there, I mean, the cool thing about that was like, you don't have that same like fame aura in Ireland with
Hmm.
anything, like with actors or anything like that you do in the US. So that was really great. And and then also the travel, like being in Ireland was just amazing. I actually went back this past summer. That was the first time I'd been back since I left there. And it felt like nothing had changed. It was just beautiful. So, yeah.
So your first collection, your poetry collection, When Men Go Off to War, were you sort of dabbling in this idea as you were, because that takes quite a while to develop a poetry collection and the writing. I'm sure was that,
Yeah.
you know,
That was so when I was in Ireland and at Iowa, I was focusing on fiction. So that was kind of my concentration was fiction. And I did work with like some wonderful poets like in Ireland. Gerald Daw was one who no one, like, has heard of him here, but in Ireland, he was a big deal, and so I always loved poetry, but, it wasn't actually until, my husband's first deployment when I was working on a novel and I was just getting like really frustrated. It was kind of like going nowhere and I was like, I'm just going to take a poetry class for fun. So I just did it kind of to like be creative in a different way. And I started writing and those poems ended up becoming the book. So it was not what I technically went to school for. But it was really refreshing because I didn't put any pressure on myself with it, and I just kind of was doing it for fun, and it worked out. So now, I'm able to do both, and I just like that.
Another tool in the toolbox. Uh,
Yeah.
Lead me through sort of what the feelings were. When your husband gets deployed for the first time, like you said, you sort of entered into this military life, not really knowing anything. But what was that like? And did you have a support network?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone is lucky to have that they have the support. I mean, it's most people have a really great support network within the squadron or the unit or because especially like for the spouses. I mean, we had text chains, we had email chains, we got together at least every month, often like more. You do a lot of social things within the squadron. So that was really great. And you're living right near each other, so so that's great. So I didn't have family there, but I had a lot of friends and that was wonderful. The first deployment, we did three. The first one, I had not had my daughters yet. So that was kinda hard because it did get really lonely, and so you had to like, I was like, "How do I fill my time?" But then I did a lot of things that I wouldn't have otherwise done, so I took that class, I trained for a half marathon, like, I just was like, "What's on my bucket list?" And I
Yeah.
did that, and I was still young, I think I was, like, 25, at the time, so, it was just, like, different experiences, so that I think actually was the hardest, like, because I was, maybe alone. The other 2, I had my 2 daughters were who I had just had 2 daughters, like, a year apart, and so the other ones, I was, like, much busier, and it was just a different experience,
Yeah.
being a mom, and I know a lot of people struggle being a single parent on deployments. I actually, for some reason, found that easier. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
I had a good time with it. Yeah, um, it was an interesting time, and you're in a beautiful place. We're in Virginia Beach, and
Mhm.
so that was lucky, and
So rabbit hole, real talk. As a father of two myself, at times do you ever look back on that sort of lonely time and think, boy, that was nice in some ways because you have five kids now, so it's like there's a busyness to life that sort of like you
yeah.
sort of look back and think like, wow, there's just the juxtaposition of that those lifestyles are very different, right?
No, it's so interesting because I don't think I'd wanna go back to that,
Right.
but you do I was thinking the other day, I was like, like, your identity becomes so much of, like, a parent, and I was like, "What was that like when I, like, didn't have that identity?" And I
Yep.
was, like, just trying to, like, figure out what I was interested in,
Hmm.
and so it was different, like, I was yeah, there were a lot of things, like, um that, I enjoyed doing, like, to be able to go out, and I was also lucky that I had insurance, like, we had an income, and so I had, like, that free time to go out and, like, take these classes, and hang out with friends and all of that, so, um, yeah, it was, like, a different phase of my life completely almost,
Yeah.
but I have good memories, or, like, really good memories of it, so.
Do you think there was a time that sort of like your writing had to mature over? Like could you have written When Men Go Off to War earlier, or was that something that you kind of had to grow into as you sort of developed your writing style and life experiences?
Yeah, I think I could never have done that early. Like the stuff, it's funny, like the stuff that I was writing before that, it wasn't as good. Like you don't have these experiences. I mean, I think being in the military gives you a lot of great material for writing, because there's so much to it,
Hmm.
and And so that was great. So I think and I was kind of writing that book in real time almost, like, as I was going through things, and then I'd write something, and then I find that with fiction, I kinda need to do it afterward, like, later as I need a lot more time to reflect,
Mhm.
whereas I feel like with poetry, it's more of, like, an in the moment kind of thing. Um,
Can you define that a little more? I wrote down like sort of talking about the differences in the genres, like writing between poetry and fiction. You know, why do you feel that is?
I think that poetry is like, it's so much of the emotion, like, the emotion is the key part, right? I mean, the words are important, but it's you have to make people feel something. Whereas with fiction, you're bringing in so many other elements, like there's the setting and the characters and the plot, and all of that's really important. The emotion is important too, but it's not just like getting across a feeling. And so when you want to write a poem when you're actually feeling something, because then it's authentic. Whereas with fiction, you need to think about it a lot more, to plan it out um, and make it interesting to carry it across, like, multiple pages.
What were the emotions that you were attempting to get across in that first collection?
I think they were, the loneliness thing was big. I think, like, fear, like, not knowing what was gonna happen, which is always, like, a part of the deployments, and, family, I think those were kind of the big ones. It was like, what is it like to have all this uncertainty that
Mhm.
was part of that experience.
You say you married to a fighter pilot, and of course, like as a civilian myself, and probably some of my listeners are like, what is what is that type? All we have really in our conscience is Top Gun. That's sort of like,
Yes, and that's
the
so not yeah, no,
which is
it is
good. It's good to
true,
like get the truth of
but
like what that really is. Yeah.
I think, it's funny, like, I think that a lot of pilots, like, who are advanced in their careers have that Top Gun type of aura, but they actually start I feel like most of them are kind of nerdy, like, technical people, I mean,
Yeah.
it starts with a lot of studying and, like, they're
Mhm.
memorizing, like, these 500-page books, right, of information, and, um, like, the type of person that is really into that and really precise to be able to do all of the precise things, like, in the cockpit is just not, like, necessarily, like, the same kind of jock type personality that might be drawn to like SEALs or rescue diver or like something like that, like the serious athletes, you
Mhm.
need to be in good shape because of the G forces, but you're not like um as it's a lot more mental, I think, than it even is physical a lot of the time.
What jet was he flying?
The F-18.
Oh, okay. That's my favorite.
Yeah.
Did you ever get to fly in one?
No, I wasn't allowed
Oh,
to. No, it's, like, really, I don't very few people I think can fly in them, I think, but yeah, I mean, I've, like, been in it, like, I've seen
hmm.
I've been around them, I've seen the cockpit, but, I don't even think I'd be able to, like, the G-force thing is
I
not
was
not my speed, so
My bucket list is take me up in one and just off the ramp and straight up in the air. It's like just give me
no,
a
I
ride.
have
I'm
no
trying
interest.
to. But back to the book. Did you have other Blue Star wives who read it and sort of their reaction to how you were feeling? Did that come across? What were their reactions?
That was the best part because I published that one, like, while I was in it, and so I got a lot of feedback from not just people I knew, but, like, a lot of other spouses around the country, which is really awesome because, like, poetry is not that widely read, so, somebody messaged me, like, they saw it in a bookstore in, like, San Diego or Barnes& and
Hmm.
Noble in San Diego, and I'm like, Barnes& and Noble has, like, the smallest poetry section, first of all, but then the fact that that book even somehow made it over there, was really cool, so I think like that I got yeah, I got a lot of wonderful, messages about that book.
How did you get published? That's a little more, maybe a little more technical question, but like that was your first collection, and what was the process like?
Yeah, with poetry, it's very different because it's a lot harder to get published, because there's not as much money in that in that genre. So
Yeah.
A lot of people do it with like smaller presses, or they apply for like there's a lot of contests and the prize is publication. I just randomly sent it to the Naval Institute Press
Mhm.
and they were interested in it. So that was my publisher and they were amazing. I loved working with them. And so that was just me, like, writing them a letter, and I was like, "Hey, here's this manuscript," you know? In general, with fiction, it's a lot different because, um, you need an agent, and you go through a lot of, like, the agent process for that, so
Mhm. Between the two, poetry and fiction, do you have a favorite? Do you prefer one over the other, or is it just kind of how you're feeling that day?
I don't, like, it's how I'm feeling. I like to be able to do both.
Mhm.
I'm j working on a nonfiction book right now, and I
Mhm.
just sometimes I feel like you can get burned out on one thing, and then you kinda have to switch it up a little to make it interesting, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Uh, Now, you said you had two daughters in the subsequent deployments, and I read that you had to go through a pretty rough time with the hurricane and living in a hotel room with two toddlers, and I would want to jump out a window. I
Yeah.
think that would be tough. Take us through. I mean, you said those ones were. You said it was easier than the loneliness, right? From the earlier deployment.
Yeah, like, looking back, I don't know why I feel like this was easy because it doesn't sound like it, but, like, so we had a huge hurricane. We were in our house, so we had bought a house, near the beach, and the hurricane came in and it wasn't, like, the worst hurricane, but the ceiling just started leaking.
Mm.
Like, all the water is, like, pouring through the ceiling and all the coming down the walls. So I had afterward, I had someone come look at it, and they were like, "Yeah, like, your whole house is ruined." I
What?
mean, there's so much water in this house, like, we have to literally rip out your entire house, because of the mold issue.
Yeah.
Um, so I, um so I had my kids were 1 and 2 at the time, and I was really lucky because, like, we did have flood insurance, which, like, everyone who lives near the beach, like, you gotta get flood
Yeah.
insurance, and a lot of people don't realize that's not part of homeowners insurance, so we were super lucky, it was all covered, but yeah, it was like a 6-month renovation, to redo the house, and so I lived in a hotel, like, actually on the ocean, which is kinda cool, like, we had the view, but I took the kids and we just, like, lived in a hotel room for 6 months. I
Mhm.
just, like, took some suitcases and put everything in the garage, and I just kinda did that, like, I cleared out the whole house and, like, hired a contractor and, like, did all of that, but, I think, the hardest part was not doing that. I think it was, like, when my husband came back and then the
Mm.
work was still going on, and I think that was really unsettling, like, to come back to all of that. It I think that sent us into, like, a downward spiral. We ended up getting divorced, unfortunately, after, probably about a year after he got back, but yeah, I think, like, that whole issue and the homelessness of it, and then
Mhm.
trying to figure out, like, he was switching jobs, so, like, I think he was, trying to figure out, like, "Are we going to DC?" We didn't know where we were gonna be, and then we ended up selling the house because we moved, so it was just,
Mm.
like, very chaotic,
Right.
so, yeah, so that was a hard time, like, I think the aftermath of it, like, sometimes it's a little easier when, like, you can just make all the decisions yourself and then, it's just you, so, you don't have a you don't have to run things by someone, but
Yeah. Did you
yeah.
have like his family supporting you guys during that at that time in the hotel? Like your family, like your support network? Like obviously, like you have an incredible amount of strength to just be able to like handle that family unit and be able to live in a much smaller space.
Yeah, I think his family was really great with, kind of helping us work with, like, the insurance and the contractors, like, because 'cause they've done renovations a lot, and so I would reach out to them for help and, questions, and then my family was living in North Carolina at the time,
Mm.
and so I would go down there a lot, and so I was able to spend some time down there. That was, like, a 5-hour drive, so it wasn't that far, so
And were at this time were you working on your second book, the fiction book, Mrs. Houdini?
yes, yeah, so that was in progress, or no, actually, no, that had already come out, actually, at the time. Yeah, that
Mm.
book had come out, um so, yeah, at that time, I had kind of finished with that book tour, and I was I didn't get a lot of writing done during that experience for sure.
What
Yeah.
gave you the idea for Mrs. Houdini? And it definitely is a big shifting of gears from that first poetry collection.
Yeah, it was I was trying to figure out like something interesting that no one had written about before. And I read this article about the Houdinis and how after Harry Houdini died, his wife, Bess Houdini, did seances for 10 years trying to contact him. They had had this pact
Mm,
that whoever died first was going to come back and communicate. And they were real believers in like the afterlife and like spirit communication, and they said if it's real, like one of us is going to do it. So she did all these seances, and then she ended them after 10 years because she wasn't able to reach him. And I thought that really was horrible. And so I was like, what if I rewrote this story kind of like, and I made up this scenario where, like, what if she had actually contacted him, but she had to hide it for some reason? Like, she couldn't make
mm,
that public. And that kind of sparked that whole story. So I wrote that novel about their marriage together, which was super interesting, because she was like his support network. Like they didn't have
mhm.
children. She was his like rock basically. And then so the book alternates between their marriage and then the aftermath of her trying to reach him.
Did you have a previous interest in the Houdinis, or was this sort of came from that sort of thing you read about? You know.
It came from that. Like I've always had an interest in like spirituality and those topics. And so I had that's I think why I found it so interesting. Like I love, like hearing about like mediums and all of that stuff.
Mhm.
So I'd always kind of liked that world. And so then I did like a year of research before I even wrote anything. And just learned everything I could about magic and the Houdinis and all of that. So it was really fun. Um, yeah,
So
that was a fun experience. There's a really uh, little known museum in New York City. It's the Houdini Museum.
yeah.
A lot of people I grew up right outside New York. I never knew it existed. It's like kind of hidden on like the second floor of this random building. It has all these amazing artifacts. Like that was really cool
Mhm.
to visit that and just, be able to see a lot of his things in person.
Are they selling your book there at that museum?
I don't know actually. I'm not sure. It's really
They
small. I
should.
don't even know if they had a gift shop. You know what I did buy there? They did they were selling they had he had a huge key collection because he was a locksmith basically. That was how he did a lot of his tricks. And they were selling some of his keys. So I have one of like Houdini's
Oh,
keys
fun.
that he used to practice. So that was cool. That was a fun thing.
So between When Men Go Off to War and the upcoming Homefront, those two books are a bit about, write about your life, write about what you know. Mentioning that you had sort of this interest in spirituality that kind of is in a, thematically in Mrs. Houdini. Are there other themes that you're drawn to as a writer?
That's honestly a big one. I think that comes into all three books that I've done. Um, that interest in spirituality and religion and different faiths, and that's like the nonfiction book that I'm working on right now is incorporating research that I've done into all different types of faiths and how they intersect. And so I always found that really interesting. The Houdinis were Houdini was Jewish and his wife was Catholic, and when they met, like nobody did that. Nobody married in the between religions back in like the early 1900s. So, or they got married in the late 1800s. So that was like really interesting to me too because they had this interfaith marriage at a time when like that was kind of taboo. So, yeah, so I think that is a big theme. I think just like women's experiences in general. So my book, the recent book that just came out last week is Homefront. And those short stories are all centered around women, and their different perspectives. So that's another one. I think that's a big one. And parenthood comes into some of it, and all of
Mhm.
that. So yeah, those I think are the themes.
Well, definitely. Let's dive into Homefront. This episode of Scuttlebutt will be when it's released. The book will have been out for about a month at this point.
Okay. Yeah.
But so Homefront. Uh, where did these ideas start to creep up, and why did you decide to write it as 14 stories? And it took you quite a while to write it.
Yeah, I wrote it honestly, I'd say it probably took me like 10 years because I wasn't doing it continuously. Like I would write a story and then I would, you know, work on something else and I would come back. And the other thing about fiction and stories is that a lot of like you want to also get them individually published before you do a collection. So you're set like I was sending them out to literary journals and getting them published in these journals to kind of build like your credibility with with the writing. So that takes forever. Like you send them out and it'll be you'll hear a response like 6 months later. So I was kind of doing that very slowly, just building up my list and yeah, so I kind of like dipped in and out for a really long time. And then yeah, I mean, I ended up reaching out to the University of Nevada Press. They have a series called the Battleborn series, which is a military focus. And I sent them the book and they fortunately took it and that was wonderful. So I was glad that that it's out there, that it was able to get out there, especially because it was something that I worked on for so long.
Yeah. Was it based a lot off of your experiences as a military wife?
Yeah, I think it's based yeah, it definitely was I mean, there's no, like, true thing there's nothing that's, like, completely taken from real life, but I would say, like, the settings is all, like, places that I lived. I mean, there's Virginia Beach shows up there, Pensacola, Florida, Ireland is in one of the stories, so the settings are a lot from real life, um and then the scenarios are kind of, um maybe starting point from things that really happened, but then like, they go off on tangents. So like, one of them was when my then husband was doing his very early training back in Florida was where they first do their first training. Um and one of the guys who was training with him ended up dying in a training crash
Mhm.
over the mountains, and that was the first time that like someone that we knew had an accident like that. So that one I think really affected me, and that became a story. The only real the only thing based on real life was it started with, a crash and then everything else was fictionalized, but, so I would take, like, these little, like, glimmers of things and make them into something. Another one, was, kind of based on my time in Iowa. When I was there, I was volunteering with a human rights organization, and we one of the things that they did is they helped, immigrants who were being detained, receive, like, legal advice, and so I went to a detention center in Iowa with a young lawyer, and we met a Bosnian man who had been was in immigrant detention, but that was, like, before
Mhm.
this was a political issue. That was, like, way back before I didn't know anything about it. Like, now everyone knows a lot about it, but,
Mhm.
back then, like, it was, kind of an unknown thing, and we talked to him, and, his story was just really powerful, and that ended up becoming a story. He had been in the Bosnian War, and
Mhm.
so that was where I pulled in, like, war in a different context, like, other than the US military. So the stories, like, kind of touch on war in, like, other
Mhm.
small areas too. So that was another one that was based kind of on real life.
Is there something about just like the why of writing Homefront in the sense of did you write it because you just enjoy writing and this is the stories that were sort of in your head at the time, or was there like an underlying reason like I need this is the book I really need to write right now?
It's funny, it wasn't a book in my mind until, like, the very end, and then
Mhm.
I started to see some similarities between everything I was writing,
Mhm.
but at the time, each one, I was like, "How can I just tell a really good story?" Like, it's hard enough to get people to read nowadays, like, with, like, all these amazing TV shows and podcasts and all that, so, I mean, I think more now than ever, like, the story just has to be really interesting, and so I really wanted to write interesting stories with beautiful language, um, and so that was what I was just kind of narrowly focused on each one,
Mhm.
and then I had 14 and that I was like, "This is a book," so that's how that happened.
And bouncing off that, how do you stand out in that crowd? Because like you said, it is a very messy, muddy crowd of entertainment options for everyone. So how do you
Yeah.
really sort of find that niche for yourself?
I think a couple things. I think the military theme is there's not a lot of women writing about that
Mm,
theme, so I think that I'm a little bit of a rarity in that respect. Like there's been some amazing women like Siobhan Fallon who wrote You Know When the Men Are Gone, and she's written several other books related to the military novels. And so she was like a real mainstay. She's a friend of mine, and she's one of them. The other one who was a real inspiration, Jahan Dubrow, is a poet and she's a military spouse. And she has written some amazing poetry about the military. But there's a lot of nonfiction out there, but there wasn't a lot of like fictional stories written by women who have been in those experiences. So, oh, another one, Tiff Marcello, wrote in a book club for Far Away, which was about being a military spouse. She was in the military and a spouse. So but it's like a small group. That's why I know them all because
yeah.
because it's a small group. So like we know each other. So that's I think one thing. And then I think maybe the other way I try and stand out is bringing in my poetry background into the fiction. So like I think a lot of people say like my fiction is very lyrical. And so I love like word language and like beautiful language, and so I try and bring that into my writing. So I think maybe that's another differentiator.
Uh, in that vein of like there aren't that many women writing about this experience, we always talk about here Veterans Breakfast Club, especially because Todd, the executive director, and myself are not veterans, that veterans have their own sort of language. And it's very interesting to sort of dive into a room full of veterans and sort of dip into that language a bit, despite being so distant from it as a civilian. Do you find that being a military spouse, military spouse, veteran spouses, that there is that common language between all of the wives, but also generationally, like the women who were wives in World War II, Vietnam, Korea, through the years?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of acronyms, that's for sure. And so, even now, like, and the ranks, I mean, even now, like, I know the Navy ranks, but my husband now he was a Marine, and like I don't know the Marine ranks. So I'm always forgetting them. So I think that is like a little bit of the common language. But yeah, I think it's more also just sharing that experience. Like when you meet someone who's another spouse, you automatically kind of like them. And like you feel this camaraderie, which is really great. And I think that was also part of like why when I remarried, I ended up marrying a veteran because we each has shared like that common background. And you could talk about things and like I knew what he was talking about. So
Mhm.
so yeah, I think that it is like its own language.
Oh, no doubt. For people that are going to pick up Homefront, what do you hope the takeaway is? What do you hope that just like in the poetry that you want the emotion to come across, what are you hoping they take away from that book?
I think two things. I mean, I hope it's just really good entertainment. One, like I hope it's just a great read.
Mhm.
So I would love, for that to be one of the outcomes. And then also, I think it's something that a lot of people can relate to, not just people in the military or people wanting to know what that life is like. I think that a lot of the themes of um being lonely, like being in a lonely marriage, remaking yourself afterward, meeting people in all these different contexts. Like these are things that I think a lot of people can relate to. And even if the scenarios aren't like commonplace, I think that the feelings behind them will resonate, I hope.
It's hard to pick a favorite. You have 14 stories in Homefront, but is there one that sort of stands out to you that this is the one that?
I the one that's just always my favorite, I think it's the first one in the collection. It's called Finding the Good Light. And that was about a pilot's spouse who they got divorced, and she was um discovered by a casting director, and then was cast in this movie that ended up like blowing up and becoming this really big deal. And so that story is about her life as a sudden movie star, trying to navigate fame, but also not having dealt with a lot of issues from her past. And so
Hmm.
how to like deal with that life in the spotlight. And I just think that one was fun to write in a lot of ways because it was like
Hmm.
the intersection of these 2 totally different worlds, like military and Hollywood. I mean, obviously they make movies about, but in real life, like military is not intersect with Hollywood, in most, people's lives. So that was one of my favorites.
What do you think for that story? What do you think America's sort of fascination with fame is? Like, do you have to play with that theme a bit in that story?
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, I find it's really interesting because I also love, like, celebrity stories and, I find it really fascinating, and so I'm definitely one of those people that's, like, wonders what that world is like, and so I think it's, like, just this desire to be known and recognized, I guess, and
Hmm.
now, I mean, it's way different now too with social media, and, people making a living off of that kind of fame. And so, as a parent, I'm like, I wouldn't want my kids to want that kind of fame because
Hmm.
I think it's so hard. It's so not just competitive, but like you don't want that to be the thing that drives you necessarily. So,
Right.
um, yeah, I mean, I think the fascination with fame is really interesting. I would love to explore that in a future book.
Hmm.
And I think that's also almost like why people are even, like, drawn to the military as a topic because it seems, like, cool and, like, mysterious and, like, like, even the military has its own kind of fame in a way, like,
Yeah.
someone meets, like, a fighter pilot or a SEAL, and they're like, "Oh my gosh," like, they're a little bit like celebrities, so, I mean, you go to, like, see the Blue Angels, and they literally are celebrities, so,
Yeah.
um, so I think that there's, like, ties between those 2 ideas.
It's the only time I ever sat in F-18 is I got to meet a Blue Angel and sit in the cockpit. It was amazing. I was, much younger. I think, an early teenager, but it was that same sort of like, wow, this is really cool. And a more recent time, I got to interview a Medal of Honor recipient, and that felt I don't even know what that feeling was. I had to actually talk to some other veterans about that because it was like, you're standing in front of somebody who went through something really awful to get awarded the Medal of Honor, and that carry and if he didn't wear it, you wouldn't even know it. You wouldn't even have known that he was a recipient of it. But he's wearing it in front of you, and there's this like aura. It's very, very
Yeah.
interesting. Um, all of that.
And
Um,
I don't even think they want that's the funny thing, like, I've heard a lot of the most Medal of Honor recipients really shy away from that fame. Like, they
mhm,
when they a lot of them are already out of the service and they're living, like, really normal lives, like, it way under the spotlight, and then they're, like, thrust into the spotlight, and the ones I mean, the ones who are alive, I think, also feel a lot of guilt that they
mhm.
are, like, that they are living, so I think there's, like, a lot of emotion tied in with that, and I cannot imagine what it would be like to have that fame, yeah, like, put on you,
Mhm.
that you didn't go after that, like, that was not the driver of the things they did, so, yeah, I really respect them for sure.
Well, if you write a story about that, I'll be first line in line to
Yes.
read that. Uh, speaking of like your kids, and I've done the podcast for a time. We have these all up on YouTube. It's fun to like my daughter jumps on and watches some like Daniel Tiger, and if I pop over and like throw the scuttlebutt on the TV, she's like, "That's Dad. What are you doing on the TV?"
Yeah.
And that same idea, have your kids like read your books or like no, like mom's a published author, and getting sort of like that sort of extra little bit of thing of like mom has this awesome thing that she did and I can read it and other people have.
Yeah, they haven't read them, but they're so young. I mean, my daughters are, not a 10, 9, and 1. So, so they haven't I have 2 stepkids who are a little older, but they're not, at that point of that kind of book. But yeah, I mean, I think, like, they think it's cool, but, like, they also don't care. Like,
Yeah.
they think it's cool, um, but I also like to instill in them that, like, they can do that, like, they're it's not necessarily about, like, getting published, like, it's just about the experience of writing and not trying to make, like, that the thing, because if getting published is the thing, then that, puts, like, a lot of really strong pressure.
Absolutely. Yeah, I understand that from like my acting days of just like if the goal is to be a movie star, you're probably going to be very disappointed. So it's like,
Yeah, yeah,
go
yeah,
in and enjoy and do the job.
yeah.
If one of your kids came to you and said, "I want to be a writer," what advice would you have for them
Well,
beyond
my
that?
2-year-old does say she wants to be a writer.
Oh,
And I'm always like, "Ah, well," I'm always like, "You might need a backup plan because there's not a lot of money in that." But,
find a
um,
niche.
yeah. No, but, like, but I really encourage it, like, because I mean, I especially love, like, them to love reading, because
Yeah.
reading is something that I really get behind, because if you can love a book, like, you're set. Like, you can explore all these worlds, you can go places and never be bored, you pull out your book. So I love, like, the reading idea. And then a lot of readers, when they're kids, like, they want to write, so they write stories, and they um want to write their own books. Like, I wrote my own, like, books when I was a kid in elementary school. I still have them. I show them to my kids, and that was what they thought, that was cool. They thought those books were cool. um
There's your next collection.
yeah, yeah, like, yeah, they're not the best stories, but, like, I was so proud of them when I wrote them.
Yeah.
So, I encourage that, because, also I think that writing as a skill is, like, becoming less,
Hmm.
prevalent, as, like, with AI. It's just, it's the skill of writing, and, I think it's gonna be something that not a lot of people have in the future. And I don't know, I don't think it'll disappear entirely. I think it's gonna be, like, an important niche that someone can have. And so I want them to, like, be good writers, because
Yeah.
when you're, like, writing an email to somebody, you wanna present yourself. It doesn't matter if you're in business, you wanna present yourself well. I mean, I
Mhm.
taught, when I was teaching at university, I would have kids writing to me, and they would, like, write, they would start their emails like, "Yo," like, and, like the way that they would text, like, and so their emails would sound like text, and I was like, "This is not a good precedent, like, for the business world," like, so, like, I realized then how much, like, the texting life was bleeding in, and so I think it's important to, like, teach kids how to write respectfully, and, the fact that, like, email is a different form of writing than texting, and
Hmm.
all.
Oh, well, one more rabbit hole then, because you sort of turned on a light bulb in my head is yeah, it's easy to go on YouTube, post a video, and have a description built from Chat GPT,
Mhm.
But what you're missing out of that description, if you read them enough, is like there's no real emotion. It's just sort of like a
Yes.
description of this. So, as someone who has written poetry, have you read any AI poetry, and how does that compare? Because we've talked about sort of the need to be able to express the emotion and develop that.
Yeah, it's so bad. I mean, the thing about AI is, like, it gets better every day. So, like, who knows what it'll be like in the future. But I do, I use it a lot, or I look at it a lot, because in my, like, day job, I work in communications. So I and a lot of people are asking, like, clients want to know, like, about AI and generative AI and all that. So I've done, like, some serious deep dives into that. And I have found that it just does not compare. It is great for getting a first draft of something. Not poetry. I think poetry, the poems that it writes are horrible. But, like, just writing in general, it gets you a first draft, but it sounds like a computer wrote it, and you
Mm.
don't want that. So I think that like, you need to take steps from that first draft, to make it sound real and also interesting. A lot of the AI, it sounds the same, like you can tell
Mhm.
what's AI after a while. Um, and it's just very factual. Like there is no emotion behind it. So,
Right.
um, yeah, so that's an interesting thing that I'm definitely gonna keep watching.
Can you give us a teaser for the nonfiction book that you are currently writing?
I'm still in the proposal phase of it. It's the title is Unseen, and it's about um a poet's view of spirituality, and
Mm.
space intersecting with experiences from my own life. And so it's part memoir, part kind of science, like what does science say about all of these things? I also find that topic really, really interesting. So it's like how does art and science and religion intersect in different ways? So that's what it's
Cool.
about. Hopefully it'll be out there in the future and I will come back on and talk about
Yeah,
it.
that would be
Yeah.
great. But until then,
Yeah.
we have the recent release of Homefront, and where can people get it? And is it just like Barnes and Noble, or where do you prefer?
Anywhere is good.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's on everywhere, online everywhere. So it's like Amazon, barnesandnoble.com. You can get it direct from the University of Nevada Press, and uh, or through my website. I have a website, victoria-kelly.com. So yeah, I mean it's everywhere. If you Google Victoria Kelly Homefront, you'll find it. So
fantastic.
yeah.
And thank you so much, Victoria, for your time today. For our listeners, check out the description below for all the links for When Men Go Off to War, Mrs. Houdini, and the recent Homefront. And please like, share, subscribe, ring the bell on YouTube so you're the first to know whenever the Scuttlebutt releases new episodes there. And you can always reach out to me, Sean, SHAUN, at veteransbreakfastclub.org with any thoughts, comments, questions, or even concerns. I'll take critiques. I'm okay with that. But Victoria, a pleasure speaking with you. I wish you nothing but the best for Homefront and the upcoming nonfiction book. And yeah, I'd love to have you back on to talk about that one as well.
Thank you so much, Sean.
We're grateful for the support of UPMC for Life, a UPMC healthcare Medicare program. At UPMC Health Plan, their goal is to improve the health of their members. They can also help you make sense of Medicare, get the answers and information you need, such as how to choose the Medicare Advantage plan that's right for you. UPMC for Life offers a wide range of affordable Medicare Advantage plans, and you military veterans can save money and get more benefits with your Medicare plans. UPMC for Life has plans designed for veterans by veterans. The type of coverage you have from your service may help you decide which plan will be a good fit. If you have TRICARE for Life, UPMC for Life, PPO Salute may be a good fit for you. You can view plan options, including their prescription drug coverage, compare costs, and learn about all the benefits you get when you choose UPMC for Life by going to upmchealthplan.com/Medicare. Thank you so much, UPMC for Life, for sponsoring the Scuttlebutt. Thank you for watching this episode of The Scuttlebutt. I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Tobacco Free Adagio Health. Tobacco Free Adagio Health has been supporting the podcast for quite some time now. We've been so pleased to be supported by them. They are dedicated to reducing and preventing tobacco use and getting the word out about the hazards of smoking and secondhand smoke. They're all about health, so they want people to quit. They have classes, nicotine replacement therapy, and a popular quit line, 1-800-QUIT-NOW. They also educate people, children especially, about tobacco use from cigarettes, cigars, pipes, chew, snuff, and other nicotine products like vaping. And finally, Tobacco Free Adagio Health advocates for public and private policies that ensure healthy places to live, work, and play. You can learn all about what Tobacco Free Adagio Health offers at tobaccofree.adagiohealth.org. Or you can check out the 2 Scuttlebutt episodes that featured Tobacco-Free Adagio Health. We had a wonderful representative come on to the podcast, talk to us about all the classes and therapies that they offer. It was 2 wonderful conversations, so I definitely direct you to both of those if you want more information, or just call their free quit line, 1-800-QUIT-NOW. Thank you again, Tobacco-Free Adagio Health, for your support.